When faith hurts. Escaping control in the name of God. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most emotionally charged, often invisible, and devastating forms of psychological harm: religious trauma and spiritual manipulation. Maybe you've found yourself struggling with guilt that won't go away. Maybe you were taught to fear hell more than you were ever taught to love. Maybe you've asked yourself, why do I feel more free outside of the church than I ever did inside it? If this resonates with you, you are not alone, and this video is for you. This is not an attack on faith. This is a compassionate exploration of what happens when faith is distorted and used as a tool for fear, control, and trauma. Let's talk about what spiritual abuse looks like, how it affects your mind and body, and most importantly, how you can begin to reclaim your own voice, your own soul, and your own connection to the divine. Let's begin. What is religious trauma? Religious trauma isn't always easy to identify, because it often masquerades as righteousness, obedience, or dying to self. It's the kind of trauma that's been normalized, spiritualized, and even praised in some faith communities. At its core, religious trauma refers to the psychological and emotional damage that occurs as a result of experiences within a religious or spiritual system. These experiences might include spiritual manipulation or coercion, authoritarian leadership, teachings rooted in fear or shame, punitive interpretations of scripture, suppression of autonomy, emotion, or identity, forced conformity and rejection of doubt. Unlike a single traumatic event like an accident or a loss, religious trauma is often chronic. It builds slowly, embedded in rituals, language, sermons, and community expectations. And because religion is often tied to a person's core identity, beliefs, and community, leaving, or even questioning the system can result in spiritual exile, loneliness, and intense psychological fragmentation. Many survivors of spiritual trauma report persistent guilt or fear of divine punishment, nightmares involving religious symbols or hell, body shame, sexual repression, or dissociation, fear of making decisions without spiritual approval, anxiety, depression, or PTSD symptoms. But here's something important. The problem is not God. The problem is how people use God as a weapon of control. Religious trauma is not about losing faith. It's about losing yourself in the name of someone else's version of faith. Signs of spiritual manipulation and control. Spiritual manipulation doesn't always come in the form of loud threats or blatant abuse. In fact, some of the most harmful dynamics are subtle, masked as love, and woven deeply into group norms and religious language. Let's break down some of the key signs that manipulation is present in a religious context. 1. Control framed as submission to God. In abusive spiritual systems, control is rebranded as obedience. Leaders, pastors, or spiritual authorities claim to speak for God and discourage personal discernment. You may have been told to submit without question. Doubt is treated as rebellion. Questioning leadership is equated with questioning God. When faith becomes a system of hierarchy and fear rather than personal growth and connection, you're not submitting to the divine. You're surrendering your autonomy to human authority. 2. Love bombing and rejection cycles. Spiritual groups, especially those with cultic dynamics, often use emotional intensity to pull you in. When you join, you're love bombed, flooded with attention, affirmation, and acceptance. You feel seen, chosen, and special. But as soon as you show independence, disagreement, or struggle, that love may disappear. You're shamed, corrected, or even shunned. You're told that you've changed, that you're being deceived, or that you're grieving the Spirit. This creates a trauma bond, where you chase approval from the very people causing your pain. 3. Weaponizing Scripture. One of the most heartbreaking signs of spiritual manipulation is how sacred texts are used selectively and strategically to control behavior. Bible verses are quoted out of context to enforce silence, shame, or compliance. Forgiveness is demanded, but accountability is avoided. Women are told to submit, but men aren't taught to serve. Authority is defended, but oppression is ignored. The text becomes a tool of power, not a source of love or liberation. 4. Suppression of individuality and emotion. In toxic religious systems, emotions like anger, grief, or even curiosity are labeled as unspiritual. Just pray about it. God's ways are higher than yours. You're too emotional. Where's your faith? This silences trauma responses and reinforces emotional repression, causing survivors to disconnect from their inner world. You learn to mistrust your instincts. You second-guess your experiences. You dissociate from pain in the name of peace. But real peace doesn't come from pretending everything's okay. It comes from truth, from honesty, and from wholeness. 5. Idolizing leaders and demonizing outsiders. Another hallmark of spiritual manipulation is elevating human leaders to untouchable status. Touch not the Lord's anointed. God placed them in authority. If you disagree, you're out of alignment. This creates an environment where abuse goes unchecked, because accountability is seen as disrespect. Meanwhile, people outside the group are seen as worldly, deceived, or under demonic influence. This keeps members isolated and dependent. You're taught to fear backsliding. You're warned not to associate with doubters. You feel trapped in a spiritual echo chamber. 6. Fear-based teachings. Perhaps the deepest scar spiritual abuse leaves is the fear of what happens if you leave. Hell is dangled like a threat. God will punish you for walking away. This is the only true church. These messages do not build faith, they build terror. They keep people stuck in harmful systems because the alternative has been painted as eternal suffering. But here's the truth. Fear is not the foundation of love. And manipulation is not ministry. Reflection break. Take a moment to reflect. Have you ever felt more afraid of losing your church than you were excited to grow in your faith? Have you ever been told that your trauma is your fault, that you just need more faith? If so, you've likely experienced spiritual manipulation, and it is not your fault. The psychological effects of religious trauma. Religious trauma is unlike other types of trauma because it doesn't just target the mind, it targets the soul, the very core of who you are. And when that core is fractured in the name of faith, the aftermath can be devastating. Let's explore the deep psychological effects that religious trauma can have on a person's identity, mental health, and relationships. 1. A fragmented identity. One of the most common effects survivors describe is feeling like they don't know who they are outside of their religious group or teachings. You may have built your entire sense of self around what you were told was holy, acceptable, or pure. Your desires, your opinions, even your career choices may have been shaped by what was God's will, not your own. If you were taught that your worth came from self-denial, you likely never developed a strong personal identity. After leaving or questioning your faith system, you might feel lost, unanchored, or disconnected from your intuition. This isn't weakness. It's the natural result of having your identity outsourced to a system that didn't allow you to truly develop it. 2. Religious OCD and scrupulosity. Many survivors develop symptoms of religious OCD, also called scrupulosity. This includes obsessive fears about sinning, compulsive prayer or repentance ritual, fear that you've disappointed God for even having a bad thought, and constant self-monitoring for signs of spiritual failure. These patterns can mirror trauma responses, and they're exhausting, not holy. Your brain was conditioned to feel anxiety unless you were spiritually perfect. But perfectionism is not peace. And God is not waiting to strike you down. 3. Chronic guilt and shame. Spiritual abuse thrives on shame. The belief that you are inherently bad, broken, or undeserving of love. If you grew up hearing, your heart is deceitful, without God, you're nothing, you deserve hell, then shame was your spiritual foundation. And guilt became a constant background noise in your life. Even after leaving, many survivors feel guilty for relaxing, apologize for existing, struggle with pleasure, joy, and self-acceptance. This isn't just mental, it lives in your body. Guilt and shame can become somatic. You flinch emotionally at joy, trust, or vulnerability because they were once punishable. 4. Anxiety, depression, and hypervigilance. Living in fear of eternal punishment or divine disapproval wires your nervous system for survival instead of connection. This means constant anxiety, fear of being deceived, difficulty making decisions, difficulty trusting yourself or others. God you were taught to love may still feel like someone you need to hide from or please. Even in adulthood, that childlike fear doesn't go away easily. Some people even develop complex PTSD, CPTSD, as a result of years of emotional and spiritual control, especially if their faith community was their primary environment growing up. 5. Strained or lost relationships. Religious trauma often creates ruptures in relationships, both during and after your time in the system. You may have lost family, friends, or entire communities after leaving or questioning the faith. You might fear opening up about your healing because people will accuse you of bitterness or falling away. In romantic relationships, you may have learned to associate love with submission, control, or guilt, which leads to unhealthy dynamics. Even friendships may suffer. You were taught to evaluate others through a spiritual lens. Are they saved? Are they godly enough? Instead of connecting on a human level. This distorts your ability to feel safe in relationships and fosters isolation, distrust, and loneliness. You are not broken if you're experiencing any of these effects. I want you to know. You are not crazy. You are not weak. You are healing from a system that taught you to mistrust yourself. That is brave. Tactics of control. Religious abuse is rarely accidental. Even when individual leaders claim good intentions, the systems they uphold often rely on calculated psychological tactics to maintain control over members. These tactics may look spiritual on the surface, but underneath, they're designed to keep people afraid, obedient, and isolated. Let's unpack some of the most common forms of manipulation used in harmful religious environments. 1. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse where someone manipulates you into questioning your own memory, perception, or sanity. In religious systems, this can sound like, "That didn't happen. You're exaggerating. That wasn't abuse, it was discipline. If you were more mature spiritually, you wouldn't be offended." You may bring up something that hurt you, only to be told, "You misunderstood. You need to pray more. You're being led astray." This causes you to doubt your own experiences and become even more dependent on the system for truth. Gaslighting keeps people disoriented, self-blaming, and silent. 2. Fear and eternal consequences. Many spiritually abusive environments use fear as a foundational emotion, not love. You're told, if you leave, you'll go to hell. If you question doctrine, you're being deceived. If you disagree with leadership, you're in rebellion. The narrative becomes, your safety, salvation, and peace are only possible within this group or teaching. That fear is so powerful it can override logic, intuition, and deep emotional pain. People stay in harmful environments not because they're weak, but because they're terrified of the unknown, especially eternal consequences. 3. Love conditional on conformity. Love is weaponized as both a reward and a punishment. When you're obedient, you're celebrated. When you struggle, you're ignored. When you leave, you're cut off. The message is, you are lovable only if you obey. This reinforces fawning behavior. People try harder and harder to be good, to win back the love and safety that should never have been conditional in the first place. 4. Groupthink and echo chambers. Toxic religious systems discourage critical thinking and punish diversity of thought. Dissent is framed as rebellion. External voices are called worldly, backslidden, or dangerous. You're told that unity means agreement, but in reality, it means silence. This fosters an echo chamber. No room for nuance, no room for healthy disagreement, and no room for humanity. You start censoring yourself before you speak. You trade authenticity for acceptance. 5. Isolation from the outside world. Many harmful spiritual systems maintain power by cutting off outside relationships. Don't associate with unbelievers. Be careful. Satan uses friends and family to pull you away from God. If they're not in the faith, they can't understand you. Soon, the religious group becomes your entire world. And when that world turns abusive, you feel like you have nowhere to go. This tactic isn't just spiritual, it's psychological entrapment. 6. Charismatic leaders with no accountability. Many abusive systems are built around a central figure who is seen as specially anointed or divinely chosen. These leaders often demand loyalty, avoid correction, surround themselves with yes men, and frame dissent as spiritual attack with little to no accountability. And the community is trained to defend the leader at all costs, even against victims of harm. This creates an environment where abuse is not only possible, it's inevitable. 7. Shame-based teachings. Shame is used to control behavior by making people feel unworthy by default. You'll never be good enough without Jesus. You're a wretched sinner. You must crucify your flesh daily. While these may sound like humility, they often reinforce chronic self-loathing and dependency on the system for redemption. People who live under shame-based theology often struggle with assertiveness, self-worth, mental health. They internalize the belief that they are the problem, and that only through external obedience can they ever be acceptable. What this all means: these tactics are not spiritual maturity. They are psychological control strategies, often used in cults, toxic workplaces, and abusive relationships, not just religion. Once you recognize the pattern, you can begin to untangle yourself from it. Healing from religious trauma. Healing from religious trauma isn't about rejecting God. It's about reclaiming your right to connect with the divine, yourself, and the world on your own terms. This is not a linear process. Some days you may feel strong and free. Other days, old fears resurface. That's okay. It doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're healing. Here are the major steps and practices that can guide you toward emotional and spiritual recovery. 1. Name what happened to you. The first act of healing is to call the experience what it was: spiritual abuse or religious trauma. That might feel too strong, or even offensive, especially if you're still protecting the people or system that hurt you. But naming your experience honestly is how you begin to reclaim your power. Ask yourself, was I encouraged to fear rather than love? Was I taught to obey without question? Was I punished for asking honest questions or expressing doubt? If so, you weren't nurtured, you were controlled. You can't heal what you won't name. And you don't need permission to tell the truth. 2. Create a safe emotional environment. Healing requires safety. You can't process trauma while you're still in survival mode. That may mean taking time away from religious spaces, creating boundaries with former church friends, giving yourself permission not to pray or attend services while you heal. It also means being gentle with yourself when guilt, fear, or confusion arise. You are unlearning years of mental conditioning. That takes time. Your nervous system is recalibrating. Go slow. 3. Reconnect with your intuition. Religious trauma often disconnects you from your inner wisdom. You were taught to distrust your heart, your feelings, even your own voice. Healing is learning to trust yourself again. Start small. Notice how your body feels around certain people or ideas. Ask yourself, does this belief feel loving or shaming? Begin journaling your real thoughts, uncensored. Intuition isn't anti-spiritual. It's the part of you that knows what is safe and true for you. 4. Find a supportive community. Isolation is a trauma wound. Healing happens in relationships. Look for trauma-informed therapists or coaches who understand religious trauma. Online or in-person groups for deconstruction, evangelicals, or survivors. Friends who allow you to speak freely without rushing to fix you. You deserve to be surrounded by people who don't minimize your experience or shame your process. You are not alone. 5. Give yourself permission to redefine faith. One of the most painful aspects of spiritual trauma is losing your sense of connection with God. But here's the truth. The God who loves you is not threatened by your healing. You may choose to rebuild your spirituality from scratch, explore other faith traditions or philosophies, focus on personal growth, nature, or mindfulness, or even take a complete break from faith entirely. All of these paths are valid. Spiritual abuse should not get to define your relationship with God. 6. Grieve the loss. Leaving a toxic faith system is a loss, not just of beliefs, but of community, certainty, purpose, and identity. Grief may come in waves. Anger at what you endured, sadness for what you missed out on, guilt for walking away, fear of being judged. Allow yourself to mourn. You are saying goodbye not just to pain, but also to the hope that the place you once trusted could change. This is a sacred grief. Let it be felt. 7. Reclaim joy and embodiment. Healing also means reclaiming what was once forbidden. Dance, laughter, pleasure, art, and creativity. You were taught that your body was dangerous, your desires suspicious, and your joy a distraction. But those are all tools of control. Now is the time to take walks in nature, move your body in ways that feel good, make art, write, or sing, rest without guilt. These aren't luxuries. They're acts of spiritual resistance. You are remembering who you were before fear took hold. 8. Stay curious, not cynical. It's easy to swing from absolute certainty to complete skepticism. While it's okay to question everything, don't let trauma convince you that hope is naive. You don't need to rebuild your belief system overnight. But staying open, gentle, and curious toward yourself, others, and maybe even toward the divine, will help your heart heal more deeply. You can be wise and soft, strong and spiritual,